Hi, I'm Lori Schaffer. I'm an American Sign Language English interpreter with 25 years experience. I hold national certification and have since 1990. I'm also a doctoral student at Gallaudet University in interpreting studies, and I'm doing my research on medical interpreting and patient care. In terms of video remote interpreting, there are a number of concerns. Many of them are technical. Many hospitals are designed such that Wi-Fi is actually purposely not particularly strong because of HIPAA concerns, and they do not want easy access to their internet-held information. So most of the important information is done by Ethernet with very little control over Wi-Fi in terms of building its strength. This is detrimental to VRI services. This is not just about seeing the picture, but being able to see someone who is communicating in a three-dimensional visual language. If the broadband speed is not at its top optimal level, this is not possible. And this does not seem to be attended to when providing for video remote interpreting. With that in mind, very little is done to ensure that patients have an option in terms of service provision. They're often either denied service or only given the option of video remote interpreting. They are the experts of what works effectively for their medical care in terms of communication service. They really are the ones that should be giving last say on what services are provided. That's often not done. In addition, the staff in the medical facilities are often not trained on how to set up and arrange that equipment. They don't know in the moment how to actually get the Wi-Fi up and running. It often freezes and crashes. I've heard numerous stories from deaf patients in which this has been the case. So needless to say, that's not a way to effectively conduct your interaction with your patients. The other thing is that people are often talking about how video remote interpreting saves dollars. It doesn't if you look at the cost in terms of time wasted with ineffective equipment, people who are ill prepared to arrange for that equipment to work effectively, and for a patient who's lost confidence in the communication between themselves and the healthcare providers. There's numerous research studies on the necessity of developing relationship between patient and doctors, and this equipment does everything possible to actually make that very difficult. Rapport is actually shown to save money in terms of length of hospital stay, compliance with medical plans. So if you remove that ability to build relationship, obviously those things are less likely to occur. So that's going to cost you money. People are going to come back to the hospital, they're going to be sick, they're not going to follow their medical plans, and they're not going to get well. So I think people need to re-examine the economic feasibility of video remote interpreting.
Hi, my name is Mike Ernest. I'm a sign language interpreter in Western Virginia. I interpret in hospitals and doctors' offices on a regular basis. I hear the stories that deaf people tell about their bad experiences with VRI. My experience is that many of the complaints come from older deaf people. Sometimes they have visual problems. Sometimes they have temporary or permanent cognitive or emotional problems that interfere with the use of a tablet. Younger deaf people seem to be more accepting. They've grown up in the technology generation. They use their iPhones, they use their tablets. And for them, the use of a video interpreter on a large or small screen doesn't seem such a problem. But anyone over 50 years of age seems to be that group that does not wish to use VRI. Sometimes it's a personal choice. I've had deaf people where a VRI has been used unsuccessfully. I am called and I come and they say, thank goodness, a real interpreter. So the older deaf people seem to make a differentiation between what is a real interpreter and what is a mechanical interpreter, and they prefer a real interpreter. Again, oftentimes they have medically related problems. They may have difficulty in the movement of their arms, and so they're not able to sign to the video relay interpreter. Sometimes the video relay connection is so poor that screen freezes, disconnects are simply a problem for the deaf person and for the medical staff. I suggest that when a deaf person makes an appointment in advance, the doctor's office or hospital department asks them what they prefer. Would you like an on-site interpreter, or would you like to have a video relay interpreter? Some will opt for either or. I also suggest that we need a complaint system in place. These deaf people are complaining, but their complaints are not being heard by the administration. There's a disconnect in what goes on in the hospital room or in the doctor's office and the information getting to people who should be aware of this. I fear that without oversight of VRI, the hospitals don't know what they're getting. They may not be getting the quality and the value they think they are. And so we need a process so that the deaf person is involved in filing a complaint that goes to the right people. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Sue Browning, and I'm a resident of Augusta County. I've been involved with deaf people for 50 years, had lots of great experiences, and my heart has been broken recently in seeing the lack of services for people who are deaf. My situation here in Augusta County is that I've gone to the hospital with some of my deaf friends, and sometimes I act as an interpreter, but many times when I go just to visit, for a friendly visit, I hear these stories that are just appalling, and I just hope that now we can make a difference. Something needs to happen, something needs to change. There are interpreters in this area, they're just not being called, and people don't know that there's a need for the hospital or for medical situations. My stories that I can convey to you and share with you are personal stories of friends who have gone to the hospital and who have vision problems, who are deaf, completely deaf, may have a vision problem, and many of my friends have got, maybe they can only see with one eye. And when they go to the hospital, they're given the iPad with the VRI, and they put this iPad up in front of their face, and these people are hurting and in pain and such discomfort, and they're trying to focus on this iPad and then try to understand what's being said, and it's just worthless. It's not helping their situation at all. They're just they get frustrated. They really get frustrated, and they just don't want anything to do with it. I've seen that happen several times. The other situation that really upsets me is that we have deaf people who have loved ones who are in the hospital. These folks are the support for their loved ones, their family members. They are there to comfort them and to just be by their side when they need them. And it may be that the patient is hearing, and so the patient is able to talk to the physician and to the nurses and to visitors. But the deaf person, who is also a family member, is being left out, being isolated, not involved in conversation, and nothing is being interpreted for that deaf visitor, family member, to understand what's going on with their loved one. This should not happen. There should be an interpreter for the visitor, for the loved one. I'm not saying that every visitor that comes in, but just for that loved one that is that helping, compassionate advocate, or whatever you say. I've seen that happen with another situation where the deaf person is the patient and has been in the hospital for a year, in and out, back and forth, and just lots of really serious medical issues. Her husband is deaf, and he has never had an interpreter. So there he is, trying to understand what's going on, and people are writing notes to him, and no one is communicating with him. And they have been through the system. This story is just appalling, what they've been through in the past year. And I just think that something needs to change. We need to have interpreters available to these people when they go to the hospital. There needs to be someone at the hospital who is in charge of interpreter services. And when a patient comes in, and I've seen in the computers in Augusta, there are red flags that come up when you have a deaf patient. And they will have an interpreter provided if they know about it. And so there needs to be some kind of a tag for these deaf people when they come into the hospital to be able to be identified And as well as if they ask for an interpreter, if the family member who's deaf asks for an interpreter, they should be provided that service as well. I just think that we need to be more understanding, aware, and maybe we just need more public education. People just need to know that there is a need in this community. And I'm thinking positive that it can happen. There are a lot of caring people around this area, and I'm sure that changes can be made. It's just an awareness. And I just hope that that change happens in Augusta County or the state of Virginia. There are many people that need this service. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Wendy Fletcher. I'm an interpreter for the deaf for the state of Virginia, and I have several stories that I'd like to share. First off, I would like to communicate some views of my husband, who is a deaf member of our community here in the Stewart-Strath-Stanton area. Several months ago, about a month ago, he attended some testing and procedures at Augusta Health in Fishersville. One of the tests involved a stress test, and a conversation ensued with the doctor regarding whether or not he wanted to be using the video relay interpreting services or a live interpreter. The doctor was very clear about his perspective, saying that in the stress test room, it is not the best environment for VRI services because the connection is currently lost within the walls of his office. Also, at times, the battery has died on the iPads. And with this type of procedure, the patient needs direct communication with the doctor throughout the entire test, and that communication cannot be lost at all during that time. The doctor is constantly checking vitals, checking the blood pressure, checking the pulse, checking with the patient to make sure that they're comfortable, that they have any pain. And if that interpreting communication is lost during that time, there's no way for the patient to communicate those needs to the doctor and vice versa. The doctor had explained that he has requested that he always have a live interpreter for those procedures, and during that time, because I was there as a wife of my husband and not as the interpreter, I was able to explain to him that I felt that same concern in the emergency department at Augusta Health as well. In our experience, we have always been told to use VRI services in the emergency room, but however, it didn't seem to be a choice. It was more mandated, and I'm not sure why that's the case. It seems like if it's the patient's right to choose what form of communication they would prefer to use, whether it's through VRI or through a live interpreter, that choice should be made from the deaf consumer. Another instance is from that same hospital stay. My husband was in for another procedure, and they did use VRI services. They brought him an iPad, connected him with the interpreter. The interpreter introduced herself, and communication was going fine. Then they left his hospital room, took him down several floors into where they were going to do the procedure, and the connection was lost. The doctor was still talking with my husband, was still explaining to him what the procedure was going to look like, what the next step was, how they were going to get him prepared. And my husband just held the laptop up and said, "There's no interpreter here, I don't know what you're saying." And then, of course, I looked at my husband to see if he wanted me to start interpreting for him, and he said no. You know, he wanted me there as his wife and not the interpreter. So then the scramble started, trying to figure out how to reconnect their iPad, how to reconnect with this interpreter, which was not successful. We reached the room where the procedure was going to occur. The nurse started prepping my husband, started getting all of the IV ready and ready for his procedure to be done. And the timing was critical. It was not something that could be postponed. It was a procedure that had to happen at that moment. So in that emergent time, we also had the stress of, okay, now we don't have an interpreter. Now how is communication going to happen for this procedure? How's my husband going to know what he's supposed to do, like if he's supposed to lift his arm above his head? Is he supposed to lay on his side? Is he supposed to lie still? You know, is he supposed to tell the doctor, am I hurting or do I feel this? So during a situation like that where it's already uncomfortable and nerve-wracking, the last thing you want to worry about is whether or not you have an interpreter there to communicate those things to your husband. So I was interpreting for my husband with the nurse while she was getting him prepped and ready, while the doctor was frantic on the telephone with his supervisor trying to figure out how in the world he was going to get an interpreter to come and cover this procedure that could not wait. And And so after a few minutes, I offered my own services, and of course, because I'm a family member, the state is liable to use an interpreter that's not family, which I totally understood. And so he continues to try to make phone calls. They're still trying to get the laptop connected. It's not being successful. There's no connection. And so then I asked my husband if he would mind if I offered interpreters that I knew were in the area that could possibly provide interpreting services. So eventually he did permit me to do that. I informed the doctor that there was interpreters that were local that could possibly do it through FaceTime or some type of avenue that way so that he could have his procedure completed with interpreting services. And so I did that. I called, I found interpreters from the Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind that were available to do the interpreting for him. And then they ended up able to get the laptop connected, and so they didn't end up needing their services. So they did get the interpreter on the iPad, brought it back into my husband, but then it's awkward. They don't know where to put it. They keep walking in front of her, so there's no direct eye communication. And there was also concerns of mine that the interpreter was not always accurate of what was going on in the situation and what my husband was trying to communicate to her. It was just really awkward having an interpreter on an iPad for that type of procedure, because it was very critical to make sure that that eye contact was present and that she knew exactly where she needed to be so that they could see one another, but also to be able to hear everything going on in the room, because she couldn't physically be there to look at every direction and everybody that was there. But my husband assured me that he was okay, that for me to try to relax and allow the interpreter on the iPad to take over. So after the procedure was done, I'll return back to the room with him, and there were still some miscommunications between the interpreter and my husband, and so I would interject and voice what he actually did say. So that was frustrating, because then I wondered, okay, during the actual procedure, was communication actually accurate? And I wonder about that. I don't know if it was. And my husband was in and out during the procedure, so he's not sure if what the interpreter was telling him was actually what the doctors and nurses were saying. On another incident, we have a friend of ours who is deafblind, who recently went to the emergency room at Augusta Health. And my husband was there with him. He relies on tactile interpreting, hand over hand. And so my husband informed the person at the desk that he was deafblind and would need a live interpreter. The person responded, okay, that's fine, we'll make sure to take care of that. Rather than doing that, they brought in an iPad to do the VRI services. My husband again insisted he is deafblind, he cannot see the iPad. Oh, okay, that's fine. So then they wanted my husband to stay and do tactile interpreting for him, and he said, no, I'm a friend of his, I'm not family, I'm not related to him, and I'm going to be in the waiting room. You need to bring in a live interpreter. So from that point on, my husband stayed in the waiting room. At some point, a live interpreter did come, and so when the appointment was finished in the ER, they came back out to my husband, and the interpreter explained that after my husband stayed in the waiting room, that then a doctor came up and was writing on paper and handed it to our friend to read. And my friend said, I can't see that. And he said, read it. And he was very forceful with him to try to read a piece of paper when he had already been told he's deafblind, he can't see and he can't hear. And so then luckily with the other interpreter that came, I don't know if she just showed up on her own free will, because I connected with my interpreting friends to say, okay, he's here at the ER, if you're available, please go if the hospital calls you. So whether or not they actually contacted her or if she just called them and said, hey, I'm available if you need me to come in. Either way, he finally did get a live interpreter. And as an interpreter myself, the experience that I've had, when the hospital, Augusta Health, has called me, they're usually pretty rude about it when they typically say, well, we have a patient here in the emergency room and they've requested a live interpreter. And they use that attitude about it when they're saying it. And I'm thinking, well, that's a good thing, because that's their right as a deaf patient. They can request a live interpreter. They don't have to follow the VRI iPad interpreter. So from my experience as an interpreter, as a wife of a deaf man, and as a friend of a deaf person in our community, our experience at Augusta Health is that the VRI services has always been mandated. There hasn't been a choice. And if the deaf patient did request a live interpreter, they were shunned upon. They were, it caused irritation from the doctors and the nurses, and that's just not how it should be. The deaf person should have a choice. They should be able to decide what type of communication mode they would like. And I appreciate your time, and thank you for listening, and I pray that you will be involved in this and make things easier for the deaf community. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ronna Wertman. I'm from Grottoes, Virginia. My experience with VRI, or with the lack of VRI really, was when my mother had chest pains and needed to go to the emergency room. So it was about 7 in the evening, we went to the emergency room. As soon as we told them she had chest pain, we were brought right in. I told them, we need an interpreter, but I'm happy to help until you find the interpreter. They said, we have VRI, but we don't know where it is right now. So I was like, okay, I'll just keep going in and help interpret. So it's several hours through all the tests and x-rays and everything. It came back normal, but the doctor wanted to keep her overnight for observation. So like, okay, but please for the morning, please get an interpreter. So we're brought up to the inpatient room. I helped answer all the questions for intake, make sure everything's settled. I tell them, please get an interpreter for the morning, and said, okay, we'll work on it. So in her room overnight, nurses are coming in every 2 hours for blood work and for her blood pressure testing and things like that. So we are asleep, and so the nurses are coming in, speaking to my mother, and I'm telling, I have to wake up myself and say, she's deaf, let me help you communicate. And the nurses tell us, we wish someone would tell us that she was deaf, or I would have just kept talking. And so throughout the night, we got like 3 to 4 hours of sleep. And so now it's 5:45, 6 in the morning. It's time to get ready for the test that will be done in the Heart and Vascular Center. So I tell the morning staff, please help us get an interpreter. And they say, we have VRI, but we'll try and contact someone. So we're taken down to the Heart and Vascular Center. I asked the desk staff there. They tell us they need 24 hours notice for an interpreter. And so I tell them, please find someone, we need an interpreter here, but I'll help as long as I can. And so the tests start at 7:45, 8, and then when the real induced stress test starts at 10, that's when they bring in a VRI iPad. And so we tell them, no, we're going to go ahead ourselves, but please find someone. The tests are over, I go to the desk and ask, when is an interpreter coming? And they tell us no one can come till 3. And I said, I've been here with her for 17 hours. I need an interpreter here now. I don't know what the results are going to be when they come back. I can't keep doing this. This is emotional for me because this is my mother. And so I go to the desk and I ask, I need to call someone myself. I pick up the phone, I go through the list, I contact someone, and within 15 minutes I found someone, and she was there within half an hour. So for 17 hours they're telling us no one's available, and the only option is VRI, which is not suitable for that situation.